Story 1. Slamming a clamshell phone shut to end a call is so satisfying. Story 2. You could text without looking. I spent many school lessons texting with my phone in my pocket. Story 3. Putting your phone back in your pocket and not thinking about it until the next phone call. Story 4. I miss how small they were and how you would not waste your entire life staring at them. Story 5. Making my own ringtones by clipping songs from my library. Story 6. It is definitely a bug, not a feature. It is the little noise feedback you get when your phone is next to a speaker just before you receive a call. Story 7. They fit in my pocket because women's clothes have no large pockets. Story 8. Being able to remove the battery is useful. Otherwise, when flipped open, they can fit in a pocket. Story 9. Well, the fact is they were just a phone. Story 10. You can buy a new battery and replace it yourself. If the phone got soaked, you would remove the battery as soon as possible and let the phone dry completely. Then you would insert the battery, and the phone would work. With no or very limited and expensive internet access, you would use the phone only for calls and messages. Story 11. Bro, I was so fast with T9 predictive text back in the day. Transitioning to the Sidekick was difficult. Story 12. I enjoyed checking the time on the outside of my flip phone and having a blinking light-emitting diode to indicate calls and texts. It was like a pocket watch you could use to call people. I think smartphones are poor pocket devices and ergonomically awkward for communication, but they are excellent media players and the best map navigation tools we have, which I love. Story 13. When your Nokia dropped, you did not worry about the phone. You worried about the floor. Story 14. Snapping them shut after an annoying phone call was nice. Story 15. I miss those Nokia brick phones and the lack of surveillance and global positioning system tracking. Story 16. You know what I don't miss? Having to buy a new car charger for every phone. There were no charging standards back then, so each model had a different connector. Story 17. Peace of mind. No Instagram to compare your life to others. No TikTok fake gurus. No scammers, no notifications pulling you into drama. You called, you texted, you lived your life. That's it. Story 18. I miss the walkie-talkie mode. A coworker's wife would check in at least 3 times a day by yelling, Donnie? Where are you? Story 19. I had a flip phone that fit in my pocket much better than any smartphone, and I did not have to worry about scratching the screen. Story 20. When T9, the predictive text system, became smart, you could dial a person by pressing each number associated with 3 letters only once, and it would determine who in your contacts you wanted to call. For example, to call John, you would press 5646 and it would find the matching contact. Story 21. Going through all the ringtones and showing them to your friends. Look, and this one goes do. Story 22. I also miss waiting anxiously for calls after 9 p.m. I miss how school ended at school and did not follow us home on our phones. The drama, chaos, and bullying ended there and did not continue until the next school day. I feel awful for the kids today. They cannot escape it. Story 23. Oh my gosh, the tactile feel of the buttons. Texting on a physical keypad was so satisfying, and you actually had to think about what you were typing. I missed that a lot. Story 24. Pretending my clamshell phone was a Star Trek communicator. I ended every call with Kirk out. Story 25. A few months ago, I was thinking about this subject, and I put together a list of early mobile phone facts. Hopefully you will find this interesting or amusing. 20 early mobile phone facts. The first commercially available mobile phone was the Motorola Dynatac 8000X. It weighed nearly as much as 6 iPhone 16s. Adjusted for inflation, it would cost over $10,000 in today's money. Depending on your phone plan, text messages used to cost as much as 75 cents each, both to send and receive. Texts were limited to 140 characters. That is where Twitter got its original 140-character limit. Mobile phone plans included a set number of minutes per month, which was often as low as 50 to 100 minutes. Additional talk time could often cost up to $3 a minute. Until 1997, no one ever had to listen to someone talking on speakerphone in public. When someone left you a voice message, you had to call a special number to listen to it, and you had to listen to all your messages in order to hear the most recent ones. Early mobile phone signals were unencrypted analog radio transmissions. If you knew the right code to enter, many phones could listen in on other people's calls. By the mid-1990s, most mobile phone plans let you make and receive free calls between 8 o'clock in the evening and 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was common to tell someone to call when it is free. Text messaging became popular long before phones had a QWERTY keyboard. Sending a text required pressing the number keys several times quickly to select one of the characters that button could produce. For example, typing the word is required multiple presses of the 4 and 7 keys. Some phones worked slightly differently, but this was the general method for typing. Until 2003, if you changed mobile phone providers or bought a new phone, you often had to change phone numbers as well. It was not uncommon for some models of mobile phones to last 5 to 7 days between charges with moderate use. Every one of them had replaceable batteries you could swap out in seconds. Almost every model of mobile phone, often even from the same manufacturer, used a different charging connector. If you bought a new phone, you usually also had to buy a new charger for it if you wanted to charge it in the car. Early mobile phone signal coverage was local. In many cases, your plan only covered the city you lived in. Traveling to a wedding in the next town could easily result in $3 a minute in roaming charges to make and receive calls. Strangely, when it still frequently cost 10 cents to 75 cents a minute to make long-distance calls from your landline, mobile phone plans were the first to start offering free long-distance calling. They still charged you for the minutes, though. It was essentially unheard of for a mobile phone to have a camera until 2003 or 2004. At the time, most phones only had enough memory to store 20 to 30 very low-resolution images. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, instead of protective or decorative cases, you could buy a whole new plastic shell for your phone. They came in bright colors and unusual finishes. You did not buy a red phone. You replaced the housing of your phone with a red one, or clear, or blue tie-dyed chrome with jewels. Drop it and scratch it up? Just buy a new housing at the kiosk in the mall. Almost no one had headphones for their phones, mainly because the phones could not play music. For a few years, there was a huge market for ringtones for mobile phones like the ones every phone offers for free today. At one point, the global market for ringtones was over $3 billion a year. If you got a new phone from a different manufacturer, there was usually no way to move any of your contact information from your old phone. You just had to retype every name and number without a QWERTY keyboard. The first smartphones were not phones with tiny computers added to them. They were pocket computers called personal digital assistants that eventually had phones added to them. The first game on a mobile phone was an unauthorized version of Tetris on the Hagenook MT2000 in 1994, 3 years before Nokia added Snake to many of its mobile phones. Story 26. I used to love ringtones. I would wait for my favorite song to come on the radio and record the perfect part to make my tone. Story 27. I do not want everything in my life tied to a single device. Constant access is tiring. Story 28. Those Nokia phones were indestructible. I remember when I was 19 or 20. I was so angry at my boyfriend at the time that, without thinking, I threw my phone onto the pavement. It broke into pieces, and the back cover, battery, top cover, and rubber keypad all separated. I picked everything up, reassembled it, and called him. The phone worked perfectly. Story 29. The battery lasted a full week. The phone was so small it fit in any pocket, including women's jeans, front pockets, back pockets, and even the tiny coin pocket. It provided real phone conversations before text messages and long before mobile data. Story 30. Flip phones. Open to answer, close to hang up. They also have physical keys. I used to be able to type without looking secretly under the school desk, but you cannot really do that with a touchscreen. Story 31. What is your high score in Snake? Oh yes, I can beat that. Story 32. The original Sidekick had a slide-out keyboard with separate keys. Story 33. User replaceable battery. Open the phone and insert a new battery without any tools. T9 predictive text was also pretty cool once you got used to it. The size and weight of a Nokia 8210 and the even smaller Ericsson T66 at 59 grams made them feel like fake toy phones. Story 34. I miss when cell phones were just phones, not antisocial artificial intelligence machines. Story 35. Texting by pressing the numbered buttons was fun. I miss the feel of actual buttons instead of a flat screen. Story 36. Hacking old Nokia phones to remove the carrier name banner at the top and replace it with a custom label. Story 37. Peace. I am not receiving notifications from every single thing. Story 38. I downloaded small pixel graphics for home screen logos and ringtones, usually from magazine pages or advertised on music television channels. When I was a youngster, my first phone had polyphonic ringtones and my second phone had a color screen. Story 39. I had the Sidekick with the full keyboard when it flipped sideways. It was the fastest typing I have ever done in my life. I miss it. Story 40. The alarm worked when the phone was turned off. Strong vibration ensured you did not miss a text message. Battery life was measured in days. The device was tiny compared to modern phones. Story 41. With physical buttons, I could text this entire response without looking at my phone and make no spelling errors because I knew which keys my fingers were on. Story 42. I loved the Motorola RAZR. I had a pink one. It was fun to use the tiny outer screen to take the grainy selfie. I also had a lime green slider phone that you slid sideways to reveal a keyboard, not the T-Mobile model but a generic slider that came after the craze. I loved the tactility of opening and closing it. It was a satisfying sensation. Story 43. Back then, when the phone rang, 99% of the time it was real people I wanted to talk to. Now over 90% of incoming calls are junk. Story 44. There used to be stands in the mall that sold light-up antennas, charms, decorations, and other wacky accessories. For a while, customizing your brick phone was the Stanley mug of its day. Story 45. Snake game on the Nokia. That was our mobile gaming and we were happy. Story 46. Be able to unscrew the antenna and pretend you have to leave. Story 47. It used to be a device you made calls on. Now it is a permanent access point into your life for anyone who gets hold of your number. I miss just making a call and then closing the phone for the rest of the day. Story 48. Allow me to be ridiculously shallow. Whipping out my Motorola Microtech in front of envious business colleagues was a status symbol. That phone cost almost $3,000 in 1989, the equivalent of almost $8,000 today. My company bought me one. Wahaha. Story 49. The entire back panel was the battery. To recharge it, you detached it from the phone and put it in the charger. Story 50. I bought a cool case, a keypad, and a clear antenna that flashed colors. I thought I was so cool, laughing out loud. This is less about the phone and more about the plan. People waited until 9 o'clock in the evening to call because that was free, or if they had been talking earlier they hung up and called back to use their free minutes. Story 51. When BlackBerry had the little light-emitting diode, I set each color. Red for BlackBerry messages, white for calls, yellow for texts, cyan for Facebook, green for WhatsApp, and pink for something I can't remember. We were not allowed to use phones at work much, so the little light was helpful in judging what had been received. Story 52. The Samsung Alias 2 could be flipped open in two ways, and the keyboard changed its layout depending on the orientation. Story 53. The ones where the keyboard pulled out were kind of cool. Story 54. I had a red flip phone that was small enough for my hands and so smooth and rounded it felt like a soothing worry stone in my pocket. I miss it. Story 55. I had the Sony Ericsson T610. It was small enough to hold between two fingers and had a camera and a joystick for playing built-in games. Story 56. Audible conversations with people felt more personal. If it is just a yes or no question, texting is fine, but if there will be follow-up questions, call me. Mobile phones let people take the internet everywhere, and it is easy to get lost and waste time instead of the internet being anchored to a computer. I did not know anyone wealthy enough to have mobile data service on flip phones back then. Story 57. Most millennials can text without looking at the screen because they learned on phones with physical keys. I still do it with my iPhone, and I wish more people would do that in public so they can remain aware, even if it looks crazy. I miss the little clicks the keys made and slamming a phone shut. There was also little worry about breaking it. Because of character limits, people mostly kept texts short and to the point, like "meet you here?" Cool. Now it feels like common sense has been lost. People text nonstop about very simple situations or seem to have a phobia of phone calls. Texts were convenient but not intended to be the primary form of contact. Story 58. My flip phone, a camera phone, was egg-shaped, so I could spin it quickly on the table. Story 59. I dropped my Nokia. It broke into 3 or 4 pieces. I picked up the pieces, snapped them back together, and it worked perfectly. Story 60. The battery lasted forever. I did not have email or social media on my phone. I could slam my phone shut after an angry conversation. Story 61. I miss the original Motorola Razr. If they brought that back, I would switch in a heartbeat. It was sleek. The case was metal and it made a satisfying thwack when you snapped it shut. I became so good at push-button texting that I could type a reply without looking. It was a great phone. Story 62. I miss being able to text under my desk without the teacher catching me or having to look at my phone. Story 63. Removable batteries that you can swap and physical keyboards. Story 64. You could change the battery. I was so angry when they stopped allowing that, forcing people to buy a new phone if the battery stopped working. Also, the battery lasted for days before it needed to be charged. Story 65. When text messaging was not free, people did not pester you about the most useless things. Story 66. Being able to type without looking because there were actual buttons to feel. Story 67. I will never forget how cool the Lucky Gold Star chocolate commercial was. I loved that phone. Story 68. I don't really miss this feature because it wasted time whenever it happened. I recall that early cell phones would emit a short electronic static noise just before a text message arrived, a second or so before the alert. It made you stop and look at the phone because you became conditioned to it. Story 69. I miss my BlackBerry. I haven't been excited about a phone in a long time. Story 70. I enjoy having physical buttons and the satisfying click when texting. Story 71. Nokia phones that never died or broke and did not require updates. Story 72. There was a brief period when people ripped their CDs into ringtones and enjoyed it, until companies required using their services and began charging for it. Story 73. No spam or scam calls. Remember people's phone numbers. Story 74. Mobile phones remained in people's pockets unless they were actively on a call, which was not very common. Story 75. Those 2 wrong number calls. The soul-shattering sound of the innocent victim's voice. Your lame, insufficient apology. Story 76. Texting was harder, so messages were shorter and we usually called each other. Story 77. I had a slider phone. I could type so fast. No worries about taps not registering on a glass screen. The sliding keyboard worked even when it got wet. If it did not work right, I could slide it shut to type the letter Z. Then you had to wait 120 seconds between messages, with a sending or sent bar. Story 78. It was great that the service was not addictive and did not try to take advantage of my natural tendency to reveal personal information. Story 79. You can text with your phone in your pocket because you know the patterns from when phones had physical buttons to press. Story 80. I had one that flipped open when you pressed a button. Felt like I was Captain Kirk. Story 81. I played Brick Breaker on my old BlackBerry during many flights and meetings. It was very simple, yet absolutely addictive. Story 82. Analog signals were better than digital. With digital, the signal cuts out at the slightest interference and nothing can be heard. Analog may have static and sound distant, but it can still be heard. You could always carry another battery for backup and power it up instantly. Story 83. Phones don't crack from the slightest fall. I dropped my phone down a two-story staircase. It bounced all the way down and was perfectly fine. It wasn't even a Nokia. It was a cheap flip phone my parents gave me so I could call them when my after-school club was done. Story 84. I was mad at my dad, so I sent him one-word text messages and pretended to be surprised when he told me we were charged for each message. I had conveniently forgotten that every time he visited his girlfriend, laughing out loud, it was expensive to cheat on my mother. Story 85. I like feeling the buttons. I hate having to look at the screen to dial a phone number. Story 86. Sending text messages without looking at the screen, everywhere. Story 87. The antennas that pop up on those phones. United States Cellular. Can you hear me now? Story 88. My first mobile phone in the early 1990s came in a big leather case the size of a Bible that you had to unzip. My favorite feature was that you could fake losing reception to end a call, although you could also lose reception when you did not want to end a call. This was before texting became common. Getting my first Nokia phone was an epiphany. Not every conversation required a call. Texting was useful but clumsy, so you often gave up and called when things got complicated. Story 89. You can send a text message without requiring an internet connection and without worrying that it will not go through or that you will not receive a new message when the wireless internet is down. I am looking at you, WhatsApp and iMessage. Story 90. You could throw that bitch across a room made of cement and gravel, and she would still work. Story 91. Sony had phones with a jukebox feature. You could shake the phone and the song would change. You could also load music and movies to the memory card. Story 92. My first phone lasted 5 years without any faults. The battery lasted over a week. It was indestructible and I still have it somewhere. The only reason I replaced it was a change in broadcast frequency that made it obsolete. Story 93. I used a slide-out keyboard. My fingers did not work well with touchscreens for typing. Story 94. Also the satisfying snap of a flip phone closing when you finish talking. Story 95. No addictive applications, no cookies, no tracking, and no social media. The battery life was unbelievable. Story 96. I had one with the slide-out keyboard for texting. I missed the little clicky physical buttons. Story 97. I honestly miss T9 predictive text. It was so fast and produced so much great slang. Story 98. My phone, a Nokia brick, fell from a second-story patio onto concrete and was completely unscathed. Story 99. Sigh. I still miss text on 9 keys. This swipe to type is still childish. I know I would have finished this post faster on a clamshell phone because I would not have to go back and correct every 4th word 3 times, as it keeps suggesting the word I told it I was not trying to type. Story 100. Not so much a feature as a general sense of not being present all the time. Phones were not the attention hogs they are today. Story 101. The amount of time it took to tap out a short message service message probably saved many of us from saying something we should not have. We had to tap the number buttons 1 to 3 times for each character. There was no autocomplete, no autocorrect, and no copy and paste. Those extra seconds gave us time to consider what we really wanted to say. If you received a long, well-constructed message, you could be sure the sender really meant it. My old Nokia brick was virtually indestructible. No case was required. Story 102. I liked hanging up with a flip phone. The thought makes me want another one. Even the LG Electronics chocolate slider was sweet to hang up on. Story 103. My car broke down once. I got my toolbox out and tried to fix it, but I could not. The police showed up and said they needed to tow me somewhere safe. So I threw my toolbox into the car without looking. The toolbox landed on the floor directly on my Nokia 3310 and caused no damage. Story 104. Everyone has a different ringtone. Now, when there is a call, half the street reaches for their pockets. Story 105. It was not so much a feature as the fact that if you had one back in the day, people would say, "Ooh, you have a cell phone. Cool." Now it is not noticeable in any way. Story 106. There was a time when you could order wallpapers, music, ringtones, and games from magazines by texting or calling a number. When I was in school, kids used to trade these with each other via Bluetooth. Animated glittery GIFs were all the rage back then. Small phones were convenient, easy to carry, and also served as accessories. In the 2000s, companies designed clothing and accessories around phones. I had jackets, wallets, and bags with dedicated phone pockets. Many phones had interchangeable exteriors to change color and design. Phone charms were everywhere, and people decorated their phones with rhinestones. It is nostalgic to see phone charms back in fashion lately. Story 107. That analog cell signal worked everywhere. Once, at the opening of Mammoth Cave, I received a phone call and was flabbergasted. 25 years later, my Verizon phone barely gets a signal along major interstates in Middle Tennessee. Phones back then all seemed to come with only the game Snake or a version of Tetris. Story 108. People had an attention span and did not have to play on a phone constantly. Story 109. Being able to remove the battery when the phone is frozen. Story 110. Very robust and a good size. Phones from that era fit hands and pockets well. I actually miss physical buttons. Touch screens are much better now and virtual keypads work, but no one writes a quick text without looking at their thumbs and fingers anymore. That used to be common. Story 111. Portability. If you were expecting an important call, you were no longer chained at home waiting by the phone. You could go anywhere and still receive the call. If your car broke down, you did not have to find the nearest payphone. Story 112. Tactile buttons. The ability to choose ringtones and alarm signals freely. Not just the limited iPhone options. Let me choose a song I like or record my own. Story 113. You could only use the phone to call and to text. That was it. You went about your day interacting and socializing with people instead of constantly using your phone. Story 114. I have noticed that no one talks to anyone anymore. It is all text messages. Story 115. Calls used to be meaningful and important. Now most are spam or sales. Story 116. They had creative designs and forms, and you did not need to use a case or screen protector. It just worked and was robust. Story 117. I missed the variety of phones. They came in all shapes and sizes with some really wacky designs. Samsung even made a phone that was also a pen. Story 118. You could tell a call was coming before the phone rang because your computer speakers made noise from radio frequency interference. Story 119. How spacious the internet felt. Felt rural. Now it feels like downtown New York. Story 120. You drop your phone and the battery pops off the back. Story 121. Being too broke to buy a ringtone, you recorded the song you wanted from the radio and used it as your ringtone. Story 122. I was riding my motorcycle when my Nokia fell out of my pocket. I went back and found pieces scattered along about 150 feet of the roadside. I snapped everything back together, turned it on, and immediately received a call from a friend. Story 123. Cost. By far the thing I missed most about my dumb phones was how affordable they were. They seemed indestructible, but if they were damaged, they were easy and inexpensive to replace. Being just phones, they did not contain important data that could be lost if they were submerged in water. Story 124. Hearing the voices of people matters. Everyone texts nowadays, and that has its upsides. But there is something to be said for the voice of the person you are calling. Story 125. Hanging up by flipping the phone closed is so much more satisfying. Story 126. I miss having a physical keyboard and phones sturdy enough that dropping one without a case usually caused no damage. Story 127. I felt like I was on an away team from the Enterprise when I flipped it open one-handed. When Shatner's character on Boston Legal finally got a flip phone, the communicator chirped when he opened it. The communicator chirp and the Klingon reference to sea lice were the funniest moments in the series. It was an awesome show. Story 128. I really want that phone with the slide-out keyboard and raised buttons back. Story 129. I loved my Nextel flip phone. It had a walkie-talkie feature that I used all the time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.